Let's continue the conversations with Ayodeji Ebo, who is the CEO at Afrinvest Securities. Now, where we finished, where we rounded off, stopped was what incentives do we need? Well, the stock market is not a barometer, but is it a reflection of the type of economy that we have, balancing the size of our informal economy with the formal side of the economy?
Yes, why an incentive may be introduced or maybe suggested to suggesting that most of these companies should list, but consistency in terms of the government policy on the fiscal side would also help. So for most of these companies that we also observed in the last 2 years, for most of these companies, based on some policies that the government decided to adopt, as affected in terms of the top line or bottom line of some of these companies. As a result, most of these companies really, in terms of performance, will not, even for those that are listed, will not encourage investors. So when we look at in terms of incentives, whether you want to give them tax holiday, you want to tie some of these initiatives in terms of sector, making funds available for part-time sector fund available to some particular sectors, how can you work with the Nigerian capital market such that they can, overall, they can also tie some of the incentives from listing on the stock exchange to those incentives that the government is trying to give to some of these particular sectors.
Hold on a second. You're saying, for example, if you are getting government bailout or support or intervention funds in agriculture, in aviation, you're saying the relevant ministry or the central bank should sit with the stock exchange and maybe the NES, the OTC, and say, look, you have to include listing in getting government funds.
Yes, it's critical, but we also need to be careful. So we can't enforce the listing. So it's to now make them see some of those advantages that they have to enjoy if they list after you'll be able to get the bailout. So it's beyond just adding it as part of
of the
package that would before they can accept that bailout. I feel for most companies that have been able to develop their capital markets, the free entry, free exit strategy has always worked out. So it is, once these companies are sure that this money that I'm being paid here as bailout, if I can access it and the long term in the capital market, why shouldn't I list this company on the stock exchange and access the capital? But we've seen that most of on the fiscal side and also on the capital market side, there needs to be more synergy in terms of when they come up with an overall policy
on the government side.
The government side as well as capital market side. They can't do it in isolation. Like you mentioned, capital market also tries to reflect what goes on in the economy. For instance, the small and medium scale industry that accounts for a major part of the businesses in Nigeria. If, for instance, they work with the Nigerian Stock Exchange or maybe it's NASDAQ, and they set up like a board that some of these companies, they review in terms of the criteria, listing criteria that you need, either pre-listing or post-listing. In terms of fees, maybe they waive it for 2 or 3 years, depending on your profitability. And some of these small companies will be able to access capital. Some of them just need 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. So you have maybe like 100, 200 companies. You know you are taking a risk because most of them are startup. But in terms of return, for some of them that have very good ideas, have very good people that run them, you know that the return may eventually be able to compensate for the risk that you are taking initially. As you progress, some of these companies can move to the main board, and you can, having established a very strong traction, then you can move them to the main board, and that will also help develop the market. Because sometimes what you tend to see is, you observe the rally in the last 2-3 months, but with the limited number of stocks, with just putting like $1 million with the funds that come, the prices of these stocks will move because it's based on demand and supply. You have more money chasing the few stocks, and those prices sometimes can move out of whack that yes, they may be fundamentally strong, but as a result of the demand, and there are limited stocks to invest in for some of these foreign investors. As a result, some of these stocks will move out of whack.
We're talking about investors' education, and we talk about we need to educate investors. What do you think about educating? We talk about the companies, but we need to talk about the investors. If we bring in millions of investors, like we did during the bank consolidation era, followed by insurance, do we have enough stocks for them to buy?
Yeah, which takes us to the listing that we're looking at. But if the potential companies that are looking at listing on the stock exchange sees that there's enough appetite to invest in the market, say for foreign investors, then they would also be encouraged to get listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, either or on the OTC platform, which is the NASDAQ platform. So I think investor education is also has a major role to play. We've seen some of the major crashes we've seen in the past. In less than 10 years, 2 major crashes. So trying to convince a client or trying to convince an investor to invest in equities, they need understanding. Some of them speculate. They need to understand that stocks, to avoid value traps, so stocks can be trading at 50 kobo or less than 1 naira. It may seem cheap, but in terms of the value that it brings, most times you can just be trapped when you consider liquidity. You may not be able to sell when you need your money, and as a result, you lose value because liquidity is key. And but if you look at the market, even if you roll back in the last 5-10 years, there are some stocks that have always delivered value over time. If you look back, consistent dividend, consistent bonus. So it is also trying to identify, work with your stockbrokers, try to identify stocks that are fundamentally strong. Though in terms of return, they may not be as much as some of those stocks that you speculate on. You can see a stock gain 100%, but because as a result of it can be acquisition, it can be some reasons that are not majorly fundamentally driven, some of those stocks may move significantly higher than those stocks that have strong fundamentals. But if you are consistent in terms of your investment policy, consistent in terms of understanding fundamentals before you invest, then you will be able to reduce and minimize your risk, diversify your portfolio across sectors. Some of all those things are things that investors need to understand. Then I would also like to discuss in terms of the regulators. I know some things, some process are being done in terms of onboarding clients or onboarding investors to the capital market. With the advent of the BVN now that you have, with the registered phone numbers that you also have, the requirement in terms of KYC should also be reviewed. So we can't be working with policies that maybe in the last 5-6 years, when there was no BVN, there was no registration of SIM, no phone number to track an individual. We can't still be using that law or that policy to onboard clients. So when they see that that process is very cumbersome, then you won't be able to get as much clients as possible. When you look at the unique clearinghouse number that we have, it's still less than 4 million shareholders that are currently registered on the stock exchange. And when you also drill down to look at those that are active, I think it's around 100,000 active clients. So when you look at it, for most rights issue that you're having, you're selling to the same pocket of shareholders, except you get strategic investors to absorb a majority of your shares even before coming out for the offer. So it's something that even on the part of the regulator, they need to also speed up their work in terms of onboarding clients. With your BVN, with your phone number registered, you should be able to have your CSS account at a certain threshold.
Ayodeji, we have a conversation. We thank our viewers for joining the conversation on social media, on Twitter. Of course, one of our viewers said Mr. Ebo has working channels, should get on board of NSC. Well, that's out there for the directors to decide. I'm just an employee here when we should get on board of the stock exchange. But of course, we have just from Abdul Wahid, one of our viewers, and Chinedu Madiebo says, well, activities in our market determines the potential of companies to raise capital. And that's speaking to what you've just said. But again, look at what the vice president says yesterday about agriculture. We have 2 big companies, or blue chips, if you want to call it, the big in the agriculture market, a part of our market. FTN cocoa processing is neither here nor there. I'm sure we have less than 10 in that particular space in the agro-allied. Yeah. Now we have an entire big value chain where Olam, where Dangote, where flour mills is playing. They are all moving into the north central and the northern part of the country doing business. Do you see something here that we want to build an agro-processing companies, build agro-allied, yet nobody is saying, how do we get them onto a commodities exchange or get them to the Nigerian Stock Exchange or get them to the NESD OTC?
Yes, I think currently, based on the last Capital Market Committee meeting, they are also the committee in charge of commodity, trying to revamp the commodity, Abuja Commodity Exchange, also trying to see how they work with the federal government to ensuring that in terms of activities, so if federal government can, they are trying to, federal government is trying to see how they will come up with the reserves for food crops and cash crops. So if they are able to buy through the commodity exchange, that will help create some form of activity and help create some form of platform. So I feel it's just more collaboration that I think we need to have between the capital market operators as well as the government, because you cannot dissociate. The government cannot just be working in isolation and while you expect that the capital market will grow. Most of these companies, the agri companies that you have highlighted across the value chains, most of them will require capital rather than use debt or even use foreign loan, multilateral loans to grow your business. Long-term capital available. And for even the average investor, once you are sure, when you tell a good story, you are sure in terms of corporate governance, you are sure in terms of the value that this company will deliver to shareholders, I think even the average investor will also like to put his or her money in that space.
Because the palm oil story and the ban on 41 items, as far as the palm oil side, looks like an interesting and sweet story.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm sure you're the CEO of a brokerage firms. You hear folks talk about these two agri companies, Presco and Okomo Oil. And we had about 5 of them before 10, 20 years ago. We had Okitipupa Oil Palm, we had a few more others there, and suddenly they went down to just about 2. Now, we're talking about rice, we're talking about millet, we're talking about wheat. And we need to get companies within this space, whether from Jigawa or Kebbi or from Zamfara State or whatever, or Benue State, to also onboard either straight to the NSE or to the unlisted exchange at the NESD.
No, interesting. That takes us back to government policy, for government to see how critical their policy formation is. For FTN Cocoa, then that listed, I think, around 2009 here when the market was booming. You mentioned the Okitipupa. But because of the policy that were not favorable, so when you look at in terms of competition, when they're selling their produce, who are they selling to? What are the quality of this produce? Can they export? For most companies that have grown significantly in other markets, when you look at South Africa, you even see the MTN, their export-led growth that has helped them to develop significantly. You see even ShopRite, that in terms of ShopRite is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, but because it's been able to expand and compete globally, that has helped in terms of growth of the company in the domestic country. So government needs to see how, in terms of the quality, packaging, policies around these things are also very key. You mentioned
and that spoke to investment, trade, and industries ministry, isn't it? Because they are the ones where you have Standard Organization of Nigeria, you have the NEPC, you have all the export processing zones, all under the Okechukwu and Elema's ministry.
Yes, I think they need to also, I know they are doing a lot, but they need to take their time and review. Some of these policies may not be applicable to current situations. Some of those policies have been formulated 5, 10 years ago. So in line with current reality, they need to review some of these policies if we really want to compete favorably globally, and most of these companies are not able to compete. Okomo Oil, Presco that you just mentioned, as a result of the ban, most of the companies had to look inwards and in terms of patronizing some of these companies, and we can see the impact on their books.
I'm sorry to cut in there. We're going to have another conversation some other day. Thank you very much for this extensive